that a huge part of what redeems you in life from evil and from the things that terrify you is your capacity to let go of things that are outmoded and dead and to revitalize them as a consequence of new learning. And it's the very soul, it's your very soul, it's the living part of you. And that's the part, the thing that's so interesting about this is, according to the wisdom traditions of mankind, that's the part of your spirit that protects you against fear and pain. Because you might say, well, you know, if you don't want fear and you don't want pain, you should build a big wall around yourself and wrap yourself up in styrofoam and sit right in the middle, you know, where nothing bad is ever going to happen to you. But, you know, first of all, that's obviously ridiculous, and second of all, you'd die of boredom in no time flat if you did that. The man who's capable of standing up to predatory reptiles is also the one who is most likely to attract women. And I think that that's been a truth since God only knows when too. I mean, we have no idea. But human beings are definitely hunters, right? And men are bigger than women, and one of the things that that suggests is that, you know, a lot of the predatory-like activities that are characteristic of human beings were undertaken by males, and some usually males that hunt. You have levels of understanding that make you up, but that you don't simultaneously understand. You can't articulate them. So you're a multi-leveled creature, and the part of you that's conscious and articulate is floating on a massive substructure that's neither conscious nor articulate. You know, that's in some sense striving to become conscious and articulate, but that can never be completely either of those things. So it's part of the pain of being half spirit and half matter. But if you identify with the part of your being that has the capacity for transformation, then you're always the equal of what it is that's opposing you, or maybe more than the equal of it. So you can either depend on the walls that protect you from things, and so those could be like actual walls or cultural walls or totalitarian beliefs or rigid thought patterns or anything like that, or you can rely instead on the part of you that's voluntarily able to confront things that are frightening and painful and triumph. And the deepest story of humankind is that that's the part of us that's the most powerful. You know, weak as we are and subject as we are to all sorts of terrible things, what do you need for protection? That's what you need. You have to be willing to let go and come back, and let go and come back. And then you can stay dynamic through the ups and downs of your life. It makes you incredibly strong. And so, you know, one of the things that you could think about in relationship to this, and we'll talk about this more when we talk about Carl Rogers. So Rogers talked a lot about the importance of listening. You know, he said most people can't listen because what they want to do instead is impose their viewpoint on the other person. Because if you listen to people, they're going to tell you all sorts of weird nonsense about their own lives and about what they think. And, you know, some of it's going to be, it'll set you back, you know, to hear that people have gone through that and to actually understand their opinions. If you can listen to them, well then you can open up an exchange of information, and that can transform both of you. And Rogers regarded that as an absolute necessity in the therapeutic context, and even in the context of profound relationships. But he said, you know, most people won't do that because they want to cling to what they already have. And so one of the things you can think of, and this is worth thinking about for 5 years. Here's something to think about. What's your friend? The things you know or the things you don't know? First of all, there's a lot more things you don't know. And second, the things you don't know is the birthplace of all your new knowledge. And so if you make the things you don't know your friend, instead of the things that you know, well then, you're always on a quest in a sense. You're supposed to embody your tradition and be awake at the same time. And that if you do that, then you'd be a good ruler of, you know, of yourself, of your little family, and if you have opportunities beyond that, then of whatever organizations you happen to be involved in. That's exactly what should be happening to you at university. It's the whole point of going to university. You know, it's not a trade school, not that there's anything wrong with trade schools, quite the contrary, but that's not what university is for. It's to turn you into creatures that aren't marionettes. And to do that, you have to follow a mythological path. Or you can be chaotic and random. Those are, like I said, subject to some idiotic totalitarian ideology, but, you know, I wouldn't recommend either of those paths because they're not going to get you very far for very long. You can't stop being a puppet, a marionette. Somebody else is pulling your strings. Something else is pulling your strings. you're a marionette till you rescue your father from the bottom of the ocean. And what does that mean? Well, it means that you're a puppet of forces you do not understand, probably prevailing political attitudes or ideologies or something pathetic like that, until you make the attempt to dive down into the depths and reclaim your identity with history as a phenomena. You know, because you might say, well, why should you study history? It's like, well, history is you. You know, if you're not studying history with the understanding that you're studying yourself, then you don't know what the hell you're doing. And you can't be a complete person because we're cultural people. We're cultural creatures. You can't be a full person until you catalyze your identity with your culture. And it's like an existential obligation. So, and if you don't do it, then you're going to feel all nihilistic and weak, or you're going to be all totalitarian and self-righteous and oppressive and, you know, maybe genocidal and deadly. So it's not something that you can just brush off. You have to do it. It's part of an initiation motif, by the way, which we're also going to talk about. So that's some... It's hard to talk about symbolism, and you'll notice, especially in the first part of the lectures, that my lectures are, well, I like to think about them as impressionist. And there's a reason for this. Like, I started reading Jung about 30 years ago, I would say, and I pretty much read everything he wrote, which is an awful lot. And it's very difficult to read Jung because there's not precisely a linear narrative. But the reason for that is that it's very difficult to construct a linear narrative about information that's been primarily transmitted in images. And so in order to impart the knowledge, you have to give people like sub-pictures of the whole picture. It's almost like laying them out in space, in a sense, and so that if you get enough of those little sub-pictures, the whole thing will click into focus and you'll think, aha, I get that. But wandering through it in a linear manner is extraordinarily difficult. In fact, I don't think it's possible. I also think that's why the kind of information that's embodied in symbols is generally not transmitted as linear articulated knowledge. You can't transmit it that way. And so it remains in, you know, forms like this. Now you look at those pictures, you know, so think about those pictures for a minute. Okay, the picture on the left, so that's ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt lasted for longer than Western, well, if you don't include Egypt as part of Western civilization. It certainly lasted longer than what we generally consider Western civilization. It lasted for thousands and thousands of years, right? And those images are representations of the fundamental assumptions of Egyptian culture. And so those images had foundational power for eons, for thousands and thousands of years. You know, and you can just look at them and nothing happens to you. You look at them like they're photographs or flat images, but they had the kind of motive power that drove an entire culture for thousands and thousands of years. You know, they had more motive power than communist ideology, for example, which only, you know, managed to motivate people for about 50 years. And, you know, it's certainly possible that they had more motive power than Christian ideas, which have only been around for roughly 2,000 years. You know, so when you're looking at something like that, you're looking at something with power. And the idea that, you know, that symbolic representations or religious representations are, what do you call, unsophisticated empirical theories. Like, that's an idiotic theory, you know. No, I don't think that anybody who's educated should be proposing such a thing after more than 100 years of psychoanalytic and anthropological investigation. It's just not a tenable theory anymore.